In December 2015, Japanese police closed a death investigation with one of the strangest conclusions ever put to paper. A man killed himself with sleeping pills, and afterward, his 2 dogs ate his face. The entire face, skin, nose, everything down to the bone. And this happened in about 12 hours after missing just 1 meal. If that's hard for you to believe, you're not alone. This is the case of Yoshi Tsuchida. It's just after 5:30 in the evening on November 12, 2015. The sun has already set over Husa City, a quiet suburb around an hour west of central Tokyo. In a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a residential building, a man goes to wake his father. They both come home early that morning after being out all night. 12 hours of sleep. It was time to get up. He opens the door, and his father is on the floor, wrapped in a futon. There's a plastic bag over his head. He steps closer. Through the torn plastic, he can see that something is wrong. Deeply wrong. Where his father's face should be, there is only raw tissue and bone. The skin is gone. The nose is gone. Only the eyes remain, staring at nothing. He calls 119. Within the hour, police have cordoned off the building and blue tarps cover the entrance to shield the scene from the gathering crowd. Investigators move through the small apartment, photographing, cataloging, trying to make sense of what they're looking at. The victim is identified as Yoshi Tsuchida, 38 years old. The man who found him is listed as his adopted son. But nothing about this case is as simple as it appears. To understand what happened in that apartment, you have to understand who Yoshi Tsuchida was and the complicated relationship that defined the last year of his life. Tsuchida was born on January 6, 1977, female at birth. But from early on, something didn't fit. He felt trapped in the wrong body, living a life that wasn't his. Eventually, he did something about it. He underwent gender confirmation surgery, changed his legal status to male, and started living as the man he'd always known himself to be. He was short, standing at about 150 centimeters, just under 5 feet tall. But people who knew him said his presence filled a room. He walked with his chin up, shoulders back, radiating a quiet confidence that made people take notice. Some described it as the confidence of a king, a man even among men. His appearance matched that energy: lean, muscular arms, a masculine face with a strong jawline, neat facial hair, straight, defined eyebrows, piercings. He had a look that said he'd fought to become who he was, and he'd won. But Tsuchida wasn't just about image. People came to him with their problems. He would listen and offer advice when asked. He had opinions, and they were strong ones, but he wasn't the type to force them on anyone. He knew who he was. He knew where he stood. Some called him a rebel, the kind of person who'd do whatever it took to chase his dreams. That determination drew people to him. Before Tokyo, he lived in Nagoya, working at a restaurant in the Osu district. During that time, he was hospitalized multiple times for what no one ever said publicly. Eventually, he moved east, landing in Tokyo's nightlife scene. He worked a number of different jobs: truck driver, bartender, club promoter. On Facebook, he went by Tsuchida Ryu. It was somewhere in that world, the late nights, the clubs, the people living on the margins, that he met someone who would change everything. The person Tsuchida fell for was 10 years younger. Male at birth, she'd been taking female hormones and had undergone breast augmentation. She presented as a woman, dressed as a woman, lived as a woman. She worked as a hostess in Tokyo's nightlife scene, the kind of work where you learn to read people, to charm them, to survive on tips and attention. The two actually met at the same club where Tsuchida worked as a bartender. Online, people who saw her photos would later describe her as a burly hostess, solidly built. At over 180 centimeters tall, she was a full foot taller than Tsuchida. Legally, she was still registered as male. Her name, according to online investigators who dug through Tsuchida's Facebook after his death, was Hana Misaki. In police reports and news coverage, this person is only ever called Eisang, or the adopted son. A physician who treated both of them later explained their situations to the press. The victim was born female and was receiving male hormone injections. The other one had an effeminate appearance, was still legally male, and was receiving female hormone injections. Two people who were moving toward each other from opposite directions. Two people who had both fought to become who they really were. What started as friendship became something more. Tsuchida started introducing Misaki as his wife, and eventually, they decided to make it official. But making it official wasn't simple. In Japan, same-sex marriage isn't legal, and since both Tsuchida and Misaki were registered as male on paper, they couldn't marry even if they wanted to. So, they found another way. In April 2014, Tsuchida posted a photo on Facebook. In it, he and Misaki are together, showing off matching rings. He introduces her as his wife. 2 months later, in June, another post. They have officially registered their relationship. What he meant was that he had legally adopted Misaki as his son. It sounds strange, but it's not uncommon for gay people in Japan to adopt their romantic partners. This is the only legal option available to same-sex couples. Through adoption, they can share a family registry, have inheritance rights, and hospital visitation rights. Though it is not ideal, this system offers them the chance to be, in the eyes of the law, a family. On paper, Tsuchida was Misaki's father. In their home, they were partners. And for a while, things seemed to work. For the next year, the relationship appeared stable, at least from the outside. A neighbor would later tell the police that he often saw them together, a man in women's clothing walking arm in arm with Tsuchida, the two of them laughing, talking like any other couple, taking an evening stroll. The neighbors knew their situation was unusual, but they didn't mind. What they saw was two people who seemed to genuinely love each other. By summer 2015, they'd become regulars at a nearby restaurant, always together, always affectionate. The owner remembered them. But there was something else, a detail that would only become significant later. That physical difference between them. Tsuchida reportedly acknowledged it to others. He knew he couldn't match her strength. It was just a fact of their lives together. And there was another thing that would only matter in hindsight. They were alone. Not just as a couple, they were alone in the world. After Tsuchida's death, no close friends came forward with memories. No family members spoke to the press. Neighbors had seen them. Coworkers had interacted with them. But no one really knew them. No one could say what happened behind closed doors. The only two people who knew the truth of that relationship were the two people living in it. And whatever was happening between them, it was starting to go wrong. The arguments started sometime that year. Neighbors began hearing them through the walls. Loud voices, shouting, the kind of fights that made people uncomfortable. The same neighbors who had accepted the couple, who had smiled at them on the street, now felt something else when they heard those sounds late at night. Something was wrong in that apartment. About a month before Tsuchida's death, something happened at the club that would later take on a darker meaning. A regular customer was getting too familiar with Misaki, touching her, pushing boundaries. Tsuchida, watching from behind the bar, snapped. He told the customer, "We're not that kind of place." The customer left angry. And Misaki was furious. That had been her customer, her income. She turned on Tsuchida and kicked him repeatedly in the face with her high heels, drawing blood. Coworkers saw it. Tsuchida left the club soaked in blood. Then came August 2015, and the violence became official. Misaki called the police. She reported that Tsuchida had strangled her. Officers arrived and Tsuchida was arrested. After that, police began checking in on Misaki, welfare calls, 7 of them over the next 2 months, making sure she was safe, making sure the violence hadn't continued. On October 27th, they made their final call. Misaki told them things had improved. Tsuchida had become kinder than before, she said. The police closed their file. The check-in stopped. At around the same time, Misaki posted on social media that she'd been promoted to manager at work. Things were looking up. Maybe they'd turned a corner. But then, 9 days before Tsuchida's death, the situation flipped. On November 3rd, Tsuchida was the one who called the police. This time, he was reporting violence from Misaki. But no arrest was made. No welfare checks were initiated for Tsuchida. The report was filed, and that was it. And that brings us to November 12, 2015, the day Tsuchida died. In the early hours of that morning, a colleague gave Tsuchida a ride home. He noticed something was off. Tsuchida was quiet, subdued, not his usual self. On the drive, Tsuchida opened up a little. He mentioned that things with Misaki weren't going well, but he didn't elaborate. Both Tsuchida and Misaki arrived back at the apartment around 5:30 a.m. They'd been out separately doing whatever people in the nightlife industry do until dawn. According to Misaki's later account, they spoke briefly when they got home. A few words. Then they went to their separate rooms to sleep. 12 hours passed, and then at 5:30 p.m., Misaki went to wake Tsuchida up. What she found would make national news. When police arrived, they processed the apartment methodically. Photographs, measurements, evidence bags. The body lay face up on the floor, wrapped in a futon. A blue plastic bag, the kind you use for garbage, was secured over the head. The bag was torn in several places, and beneath the plastic, where Tsuchida's face should have been, there was almost nothing. The skin had been stripped away entirely. The nose was gone. Bone was visible beneath the raw tissue. Only the eyes remained intact. One investigator would later describe it as looking as an anatomical model. There was no blood elsewhere in the room, no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no weapon. And the skin itself, that which should have been covering his entire face, was never found. In the days after the discovery, Misaki gave a phone interview to Tokudane, a popular Japanese television program. She described what she saw that evening, but her account of events raised as many questions as it answered. She described the moment she found him. I really didn't see it properly. There was a bag over it, and only one eye was open. I could see only one eye. Then I panicked and called 119. I was so shocked. I thought something was wrong with my eyes. When asked about the fights, the police reports, the history of violence, she acknowledged them. The fights continued, that's true. The causes were trivial. Even when we fought and I left the house, we never broke up. He wasn't someone I could cut ties with. There was nothing I disliked about him, she said. Shortly after the body was discovered, Misaki posted a message on Facebook. Just a few words. Why? What happened? And it was that post that would haunt the case because people started asking, why would she write that? And think about that for a moment. If Misaki was the one who found the body, if she was the one who walked into that room, saw Tsuchida's destroyed face and called 119, why would she be posting what happened online hours later? Was it a performance of innocence, a public display of shock to create distance from the crime? Was it genuine dissociation, someone in crisis posting without thinking about how it looks? Or was it something else? The post was never explained. By November 13th, the apartment building was surrounded by cameras. Reporters jostled for angles. The story had everything: sex, violence, gender, and a mutilated face. It was like catnip for the press. The initial autopsy came back inconclusive. Cause of death, unknown. A full pathological examination was ordered. That same day, 미안해야, a popular daytime news program, aired expert commentary on the case, and the theories they discussed were disturbing. Former prosecutor Yuko Sumita suggested the facial mutilation might have been an attempt to hide evidence, specifically blunt force trauma to the head. She raised another possibility too, one that made viewers lean closer to the screens. Maybe the perpetrator had eaten the missing skin. Masayuki Kiryu, a professor of criminal psychology at Toyo University, offered a different theory. Maybe the killer wanted to see the victim's true face, or maybe it was something even stranger, a twisted expression of love, an attempt to merge with the victim by literally consuming their identity. Cannibalism, consumption of another's identity. These were the theories being discussed on national television at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But the official conclusion, when it finally came, was nothing like any of them. In December 2015, the toxicology results came back, and police announced their findings. The cause of death was acute poisoning from etazolem, a benzodiazepine, a sleeping pill. Tsuchida had been a regular user of sleep medication, but the amount in his system was enough to kill him. Police concluded that Tsuchida had overdosed. Whether it was intentional or accidental, they couldn't say for certain. But there were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, nothing to suggest anyone had forced those pills down his throat. Self-inflicted death or accidental overdose. That was the finding. But that still left the key question that everyone was asking. What happened to his face? Tsuchida had pets, a Chihuahua, a mixed-breed dog, and a cat. He posted about them on social media. He clearly loved them. Then forensic investigators examined the dogs. They found Tsuchida's blood on both of their noses. The DNA from the dogs was also found on the torn plastic bag, the one that had been over his head. The wounds on his face, police said, were inconsistent with knife cuts. Under closer analysis, they matched the bite patterns of small animals. So the official conclusion was his dogs, hungry, confused, trapped in the apartment with a body, had chewed through the plastic bag and eaten the skin from his face. So the conclusion was self-inflicted death and post-mortem scavenging by pets. The case was closed. No charges were filed. But almost no one believed it. The early reports had described the wounds as clean, surgical almost, the kind of cuts you would make with a blade. Now the police were saying it was dogs. If the dogs were hungry enough to eat human flesh, why did they only go for the face? The hands were accessible, the neck was exposed. The face was covered by a plastic bag and wrapped in a futon. Surely that's not where a hungry animal would start. And how hungry could they have been? The dogs had gone without food for about 12 hours, from 5:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. That is uncomfortable, sure, but it's a skipped meal, not starvation. Chihuahuas don't typically eat their owners because they missed breakfast. The cannibalism theory from 미안해야, it was never investigated. The identity merging hypothesis, ignored. The police landed on the dog theory and just closed the book. And then there was the obvious suspect, Misaki. A foot taller than Tsuchida, physically stronger by Tsuchida's own admission, sleeping in the next room for 12 hours while all of this supposedly happened. A documented history of violence between them, going both ways. A person who would be freed from a deteriorating relationship by Tsuchida's death. Public suspicion fell on her immediately. Online, people were vicious. Forums, social media, comment sections, everyone had a theory, and most of them pointed to the same person. Misaki reportedly buckled under the pressure. According to the weekly Bunshun, which ran a story on the case in its November 26 issue under the headline Death Mask, Misaki contacted the magazine directly. Her message was simple: I didn't do anything, and I don't know what happened. And without physical evidence linking her to the death, the police had no grounds for an arrest. Misaki was never charged. After that, the case slipped out of the news cycle. Other stories took over, and people just moved on. Over time, the digital footprint of the case began to disappear. News articles were deleted, links went dead. The sources that had documented the case in real time slowly vanished from the web. When someone on Yahoo Japan asked years later if there had ever been any updates, the only reply was a link to an article that no longer existed. Miyake's Facebook account, the one with the "Why? What happened?" post, was also deleted. So was Tsuchida's. The archived versions that 2channel users had saved on archive.is remained for a while, fragments of evidence preserved by strangers on the internet. But many of those links had gone dead too. The 2 dogs were taken as evidence. What happened to them after that was never reported. No one knows if they were rehomed or put down. No new evidence has emerged. No arrests have been made. The official cause of death remains self-inflicted death by drug overdose, with post-mortem mutilation attributed to household pets. So where does that leave us? The case doesn't end with answers. It ends with questions. How did wounds that investigators initially described as knife-like turn out to be dog bites? How could 2 small dogs really strip an entire human face down to the bone in a matter of hours? And would they really do that after missing a single meal? What was happening in that apartment during the 12 hours when someone claimed to be asleep in the next room? And if it wasn't the dogs, then who removed Yoshi Tsuchida's face and why? The apartment in Husa City has long since been cleaned out. New tenants, maybe, or just empty rooms waiting for someone who doesn't know or doesn't care about the history. The people involved have disappeared from public view. The case file sits closed in a cabinet somewhere, gathering dust. But the questions don't go away. They just sit there, unanswered, waiting for someone to look again. We can only hope that someone takes an interest and finally confirms what happened to Yoshi Tsuchida. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.